This is a really important debate that we're having here today, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to outline the benefits of the Migration and Asylum Pact, but also to be able to outline once again and to stress that inward migration has been hugely positive for Ireland. It has provided significant benefits to our economy and to our society. We can all see this in our hospitals, in our nursing homes, in our hospitality sector, in our agricultural and food processing sectors. We only have to look at the figures from last year alone. 31,000 employment permits. Over 10,000 of these permits were issued to people in the health and social work sector. And we all have our own stories. My own little boy, when he was 6 months old, had to go into hospital for a number of days. Much of the staff, much of the doctors, the nurses that looked after him, that minded him, were not born in Ireland, nor were they born in the European Union. So we all see the benefits and know that so many of our sectors would be lost without these people. They also contribute significantly to our tax revenue, €3 billion actually every year. In discussing migration, I'm also conscious that Irish people emigrated to every corner of the planet in search of a better life, and for a population of 5 million people, which claim 70 million people with Irish diaspora or descent, migration is very clearly a part of the Irish story. Today, in the context that we're discussing this pact today, we see more people on the move than any time since World War II. War, conflict, famine, persecution, climate change and poverty are driving these people to seek a better life. The invasion of Ukraine, the war in Syria, the wars and conflict ongoing in Africa, they're all driving migration, and as we've heard, we're also seeing migration being weaponised by countries, including Russia, who seek to undermine our democracies and to radicalise political discourse. And this was made very clear to me in the last few days when attending the Justice and Home Affairs Council, in particular my colleagues from the Scandinavian countries and the Baltic member states, outlining their concerns and the challenges that they are facing. What is very clear from these conversations, and indeed the conversations that Taoiseach referenced earlier, is that we cannot deal with what is a global and a European challenge by dealing with on our own. The EU Migration and Asylum Pact, which has been negotiated over many years, has now become EU law, and it's been and represents the collective effort of the European Union to manage this issue, to develop an approach which is firm but fair, while at the same time working with countries to address the root causes of migration. And so we're here to discuss the opting into the EU Migration and Asylum Pact. There are those who claim that we can go it alone. There are those who claim that Ireland is full. But they have no plan. They have no plan to deal with this challenge. They have no plan to provide support for those who need it. They have no plan whatsoever. All the while, like many, many countries, we have seen and continue to see a significant increase in the number of people applying for international protection. However, what's clear is that our system was not designed to deal with the volume of applications far lower than we're currently dealing with, or it was designed to deal with situations far lower than we're dealing with now. Our international protection system is under considerable pressure, but we are responding. We're not waiting. We've ramped up investment in staff. We've introduced an accelerated processing system. We're strengthening our return system as well. The Pact now represents a significant opportunity to further reform and improve the operation of the international protection system, because the legislation that we have, the 2015 Act, it's no longer fit for purpose. Subject to motions being passed in the Dáil and the Seanad, I will begin preparations for implementation of the Pact, and this will include a new bill to repeal and to replace the International Protection Act of 2015. This will be done in parallel with a complete re-engineering of our entire system from start to finish. We need a system that works faster, one that enables people granted protection to quickly obtain status, to integrate, to start a new life, but also one that ensures the efficient removal of those who are not entitled to be here. So to give you a brief overview of the Pact. Firstly, the screening regulation will apply where a person first enters the EU irregularly or where they're identified in a member state without permission. They'll be required to undergo a screening procedure within 7 days at most. This will consist of identification or verification of identity. There will be health and vulnerability checks, security checks, fingerprints and registration in what's known as the Eurodac database. While we can't opt into this measure because we're not members of Schengen, we will align our laws with this system to ensure that we can benefit from the data which is gathered throughout Eurodac, while also providing this data to other member states. At the end of screening, all people will be directed to relevant procedures. There will be 4 procedures, all common across the EU: a border procedure, an accelerated procedure, inadmissibility procedures and an ordinary or standard procedure. The most significant change is the introduction of a new mandatory border procedure. This will apply to people who have misled authorities, such as destroying documents, who are a danger to national security or public order, or who come from countries with a 20% of lower approval rate for asylum applications across the EU. Those who are processed under the border procedure will not be authorised to enter Ireland and will be accommodated at designated locations. Their applications must be processed within 3 months, and if unsuccessful, they will be removed within a further 3 months at most. Ireland already operates the accelerated procedure, so for example, people from safe countries of origin, and since this was introduced in November of 2022, the number of people arriving from these countries has dropped by 50%. The new regulation will make accelerated processing mandatory for certain applicants and include a 3-month deadline for first decisions on such cases. We also operate an inadmissibility procedure, the third one, so where people have already been granted asylum elsewhere. The new regulation requires decisions to be made again in the first instance in 2 months. The ordinary procedure, which is a standard procedure for international protection applicants, introduces a 6-month deadline. We will also legislate for appeals timelines, and we will of course be ambitious in our targets. In relation to identity checking and secondary movements, the Eurodac regulation will give Ireland access to improved IT systems that allow us to carry out these additional checks. The new regulation expands the scope for wider immigration purposes to include asylum applicants, irregular migrants apprehended at the border, irregular migrants found to be illegally staying, new categories for people who've disembarked following search and rescue operations, and beneficiaries of temporary protection. It will also now include children aged 6 and above, and this is in particular to enhance protections for children and to combat child trafficking. Accessing information on which Member State is responsible will help with returning secondary movers to the correct Member State. Importantly, we will have access to this security information where applicable from screening checks in other Member States. As a country, as we've heard already, we experience a high level of secondary movement. This is where someone applies for asylum in another Member State and then applies here in Ireland. The Pact provides us with the legal tools necessary to ensure that we can return an applicant to the first Member State where there is an international protection application already lodged. Dublin 3, which we have heard time and time again, is not fit for purpose. It doesn't work. It will be replaced by the Pact. Therefore, if we don't opt in, we will have absolutely no legal basis to return people to other Member States. The Pact will make the transfer process clear. It introduces timelines to issue of transfer notifications. It replaces the current take-back request with a much simpler take-back notification, which will reduce administrative burdens on the current system. It will allow us to identify and return secondary movers to the correct Member State responsible, freeing up our system to assist those seeking international protection swiftly and efficiently. There are those who are also saying that this will be a cost to Ireland. Yes, of course there will be a cost in making sure that we can ramp up our processing. However, there will be much more significant costs if we do not opt in. It's likely that we will face higher levels of secondary movement, slower processing, a less efficient return system. This in itself would result in applicants staying much longer in accommodation and making sure that we have to pay for that as well as other supports. We wouldn't have access to the €1 billion worth of funding which will be available to Member States to implement the Pact across the EU, and further funding will be made available. So we need to invest now in the system to make sure that it doesn't cost us in the long run. So again, I would ask deputies in the House who say that we should abandon European solidarity in favour of going it alone. This approach, there are no plans being provided for this option. Other measures in the Pact include a harmonisation of reception conditions across Member States, accommodation, subsistence provisions. Again, this is to reduce incentives for members and individuals to move one Member State to another. The Pact also establishes a new solidarity mechanism to ensure the fair sharing of responsibility across the EU. We will decide annually how we opt into that. It is not true to say that we will have to accept 30,000 people every year, which is what has been said by deputies in this House and senators, nor will we be fined hundreds of millions of euros. We will be asked to accept 648 people every year or pay a financial contribution, and that decision is completely up to us. Any decision to change those figures or that overall system would have to be agreed by all Justice Ministers right across the EU. But really what this does is show solidarity with Member States. We think of those on the front line where there is an unprecedented number of people seeking protection along their shores, Greece, Italy. We have to show solidarity, we have to show support. Of course, we're not waiting for the Pact to introduce changes. Already, I've doubled the number of staff in the International Protection Office. That's tripled the number of decisions, with further increases planned for this year and next. I've introduced fast-track processing in November of 22, as I've mentioned earlier, 50% reduction in applications from those countries. I've suspended visa-free travel for certain refugees and added more countries to the visa-required list. We've ensured over 3,000 doorstep operations were carried out on flights that pose a risk of irregular migration to the end of May this year. I'm legislating to increase fines on carriers from the current maximum of €3,000 to €5,000, and all of these changes have actually meant that in the last 2 years the number of people coming to our ports and airports without the correct documentation has reduced by 40%. I'm freeing up 100 Gardaí from back office roles to support immigration enforcement activities, and this includes deportations, and we have seen over recent months prosecutions for people arriving without appropriate documentation, and a significant number of those have also been imprisoned. I'm continuing to look at additional measures that can be taken in the coming weeks. This includes continuing to ramp up investment in staffing and capacity. Today I had a memo at Cabinet setting out how we will hire 400 more staff to bring us in line and to ramp up the system from start to finish. I'll complete the review of additional safe countries in the coming weeks, extend restriction on visa-free travel for certain countries, and complete a tender for charter airplanes to return unsuccessful applications. All of this work is underway. All of this work is to make sure that we are ready to join the Pact in 2 years' time. As I've said, the Pact presents us with an opportunity to completely reform, to re-engineer our systems, and I would ask deputies opposing, what are your solutions? What are your plans here? I've outlined some of the benefits to Ireland from joining the Pact. However, it would be remiss of me, and I think to the Taoiseach's point, that we are a compassionate country, that we want to support those who need our protection and who need our help. The Pact holds benefits for those applicants themselves. It will establish a faster, a fairer processing of asylum applications across the EU, providing for appeals, providing for safeguards for vulnerable people, in particular protecting children who are seeking our protection. The Pact is the way for us to deal with and respond to what is a global, a significant challenge, ensuring that we have a system that's firm but fair, fair to those who genuinely need our protection and help, but firm to those who don't. I commend this motion to the House. Thank you.